All right, so let's get started. Thank you again for taking out time and joining me today in this session. My name is Roshan. I work with Ingram Micro as a solution architect. I'm based in Melbourne. I primarily help partners build solutions on Azure. I help them with proof of concept, demos, meetings with customers, trying to map the business requirements to technology and helping them solve some of the pain points that they have. Today, we will be talking about a very interesting topic, Windows Virtual Desktop. This is a fairly new feature that Microsoft has introduced. We'll also be talking about another very exciting offer from Ingram Micro known as Azure Starter Pack. So both these two work in conjunction with each other, and in today's session, you'll see what Ingram Micro can offer you for both Windows Virtual Desktop and Azure Starter Pack. So to begin with, let's look at the agenda. So we'll quickly look at what's the market potential for Windows Virtual Desktop or in general desktop as a service. What is the forecast? How big is the market? We'll also quickly compare the traditional RDS deployment that a lot of partners have been doing for a very long time, and they have a lot of customers who are running applications and users accessing desktops and apps on a traditional VDI infrastructure. We'll compare that with the latest desktop as a service functionality. Then we'll deep dive into Windows Virtual Desktop. We'll look at the features, the functionalities, the benefits, high-level architecture of Windows Virtual Desktop. And in this whole story of Windows Virtual Desktop, where does the Azure Starter Pack come in? Azure Starter Pack is a one-click automated solution by Ingram Micro, which is available in our marketplace. And I will show you how Azure Starter Pack works with Windows Virtual Desktop to make your deployment much more easier. We'll also look at the overall deployment steps that Windows Virtual Desktop has. I'll also be introducing some of the upcoming Ingram Micro Windows Virtual Desktop packages, which you can use, resell to your customers. Of course, these are guideline packages. These can be tweaked according to your expertise. If you want to add and remove some items in the packages, we can definitely do so as well. And we'll at the end look at some of the questions that you have. During the entire session, if you have any questions, feel free to put them on the chat. I will review all the questions at the end of today's session and try to answer all of them at the end. If I'm not able to answer them, or if I don't know the answer to some of them, I will do my research and get back to you in the next couple of days. Great, so let's get started and let's deep dive into the market potential for Windows Virtual Desktop or Desktop as a Service. So these are numbers from Gartner and IDC, right? So Gartner and IDC have done the research, and they have said that desktop as a service is almost a $3 billion revenue generating business in the year 2020, right? So a lot of companies today have remote users, contract employees, and all these people need access to desktops, need access to applications, and at the same time, you need to protect your corporate data. So desktop as a service is one of the most suitable solutions for these requirements. Over 50% of the customers are choosing desktop as a service functionality over traditional Windows Virtual Desktop infrastructure. As we all know, Windows Virtual Desktop or any other VDI solution is expensive, time consuming. It takes a lot of time to set it up and have the services up and running on them. There's a lot of capex involved, a lot of licenses need to be purchased, and there are technologies where you need to be trained. For example, if you need to implement a Citrix system, then you need a certified Citrix engineer to help you set it up and make sure the customer gets the benefit. Now, why do we see these big numbers? Why is that the customer moving towards desktop as a service functionality? Well, most of the customers today are moving away from the traditional office where we have seen people working from cubicles, people coming to office every single day from 8 to 5 and working on the same tasks again and again. Market is moving away from such work lifestyle to work from anywhere kind of a work lifestyle. So all the companies are now giving their employees the benefit of bringing their own device, working from home, working from different locations. Companies now make sure that the work is getting done, but it doesn't really worry about where the employee sits and how he accesses the data. Yes, it's definitely something that the IT admins have to take care of. They have to make sure the internal end users are able to access the right applications. They're not accessing applications which are restricted, and at the same time, they're protecting the corporate data. So it's a combination of employees' free lifestyle and data protection. So let's look at how the various features that are introduced in desktop as a service functionality helps you achieve this. So a quick comparison between the traditional VDI and desktop as a service. As we all know, traditional VDI, you have to make sure it's a long-term commitment. You have to bring in the hardware, the software, the licenses, storage, planning 3 years, 5 years in advance. You need to make sure that you manage all the various roles and functionalities of the traditional VDI. So, for instance, if you are implementing a Microsoft VDI solution, you need to take care of the various roles. You need to take care of its storage, its scalability. You need to make sure the hardware uh, is good enough to cater to graphics intensive users or power users. It is also a capex, right? So you have to build all these infrastructure at the beginning itself. It's fixed sizing. It is very difficult to scale. You would probably be able to scale based on your plan, but if there is more demand from the customer who wants to scale beyond the initial expectation, then it becomes very difficult when it is a traditional VDI. Whereas in desktop as a service, it is hosted, managed, and maintained by a vendor. It is very fast when it comes to implementation. You can pretty much be up and running in less than a day's time. You can go ahead, utilize most of the global infrastructure that the vendor provides. You can have people accessing from different parts of the globe, different parts of the country. You don't need to worry about the server uptime. You don't need to worry about maintaining the backend hardware, the backend network. So all the benefits that you get with the typical public cloud infrastructure is what you can enjoy with desktop as a service. Plus, when we talk about finance, it is always pay as you use, right? So you don't need to buy in a huge number of desktops at the beginning. If you are working with a smaller customer, you can only buy the desktops that they require as of today, and as and when new employees join your customer, you can keep scaling the desktops whenever required. So it's a beautifully integrated technology that works for most of the customer scenarios. Over the coming slides, you'll see the various use cases that we have for desktop as a service and how you can look at your existing customers and see how you can implement this technology. So one of the most interesting desktop as a service functionality which was introduced by Microsoft is Windows Virtual Desktop. Windows Virtual Desktop was introduced early this year. It was in preview for almost 9 months, and now Microsoft has made it generally available. It's a desktop as a service offering that is available from Microsoft Azure. It delivers a multi-session Windows 10 experience. Now, what do I mean by that? Windows 10, in some of its latest updates, has a feature that lets multiple users log into the same Windows 10 desktop. using this functionality on Windows Virtual Desktop, you can have multiple users log into the same desktop at the same time. Microsoft has also put in a lot of efforts to make sure the Office 365 Pro Plus is integrated into this experience. So when a user logs in, let's say when multiple user logs in onto the same desktop, they get their own Outlook profile, they get their own local cache, they get their own desktop or user profile details. All these are very much integrated with Windows Virtual Desktop. Also, remember, after January 14th, 2020, Windows 7 will stop receiving security updates and patches by Microsoft. So if you do have customers who have custom applications that are purpose built for Windows 7 operating system, after January 14th, 2020, they will not receive security updates for Windows 7. Now, if they want to be compliant, they want to continue to receive and be protected by hackers and malware, then Windows Virtual Desktop is the only supported way of doing it. They can move their desktops to Windows Virtual Desktop, run Windows 7 with their custom applications on it, and receive 3 years of extended support in terms of security updates and patches from Microsoft. So it's a very good replacement for on-prem desktops, on-prem applications that are dependent on Windows 7. It is also integrated with Microsoft 365. So if you have customers who are already using Microsoft 365 for enhanced security, advanced threat protection, advanced identity protection, all those will further get integrated with Windows Virtual Desktop. With Windows Virtual Desktop, you also get an option to choose personal desktop or dedicated desktop. Windows Virtual Desktop gives you the option to either have pool desktop where you can have 2, 3, 4 desktops being shared by, let's say, 7 to 10 employees, or for power users or users who need dedicated desktops for their resource intensive applications which they access, or if you have customers who need graphics enabled desktops for, let's say, machine design or product design or building design, if they use applications such as AutoCAD. So if they need graphics intensive desktops, then even that is possible from Windows Virtual Desktop. So you can either have pooled desktops for less resource intensive work employees, and for resource intensive or power users, you can have personal or dedicated desktops. You can have a combination of both of them provided to your customers. So you can always look at these options to reduce cost, to improve employees' productivity, and at the end of the day, get the customer access to the applications that they require. Windows Virtual Desktop is automated in many ways. So in the next coming slides, you'll see a lot of roles have been hosted by Microsoft, so you don't need to worry about managing and maintaining them, and you can scale up or scale down in minutes rather than in the traditional VDI. You have to buy the new hardware, you have to join the machines to the domain, you have to take care of so many other things. In Windows Virtual Desktop, all of these happen in a matter of minutes. So a closer look at the Windows Virtual Desktop overall architecture. So as you see here, we have clients. Windows Virtual Desktop has its own RD remote desktop clients, or you can even use any HTML5 browser. So the remote client is available in all the other platforms as well. They have an Android client, they have a iOS client, they have a Windows client, of course. Or if your customer doesn't want to access applications or desktops via the client, even a simple HTML5 browser such as Edge or Chrome or Mozilla would also work, right? The image in the middle is the various roles of Terminal Server or RDS, as we know. So if you implement a typical on-prem remote desktop infrastructure, you need to install session broker, you need to install gateway role, you need to install licensing server, you need to install a web access. All these are various roles that you need to install either on one machine or multiple machines. When it comes to Windows Virtual Desktop, all these are managed and maintained by Microsoft. So you don't need to worry about managing and maintaining the RDS or terminal server roles. All you need to worry about is how many desktops do I need? What kind of desktops do I need? Do I need pooled desktops? Do I need personal desktops? Do I need desktops with graphics card in them? How do users authenticate to these desktops, right? So these are the things that you would probably plan and worry more rather than worrying about the underlying infrastructure of remote desktop roles. So Microsoft has made it very simple and straightforward to use. And as we discussed in the previous slide, you can deploy and scale these roles and desktops in a matter of minutes. So who are the customers who are eligible for Windows Virtual Desktops? So for customers who are already using Microsoft 365, remember it is Microsoft 365 and not Office 365. Microsoft 365 includes a Windows 10 license component which you could reuse with Windows Virtual Desktop. So if you already have customers who are using Microsoft 365 E3 or E5 or education plans or business or F1 plan, then they already have a piece of license which you can reuse on Windows Virtual Desktop. For an Office 365 customer, you will need to pay for the Windows 10 license and for the compute. For customers who are part of any of the my M365 plans which are displayed on the slide, they only need to pay for the compute. They don't need to pay for the Windows 10 piece of the license. Also, if you want to provide server workloads on Windows Virtual Desktop, which is possible, then they need to have RDS CALs with software, active software assurance, right? If they don't, then they will need to purchase this additional. So this is a very high level overview of who are the customers that you can actually go ahead and target and sell Windows Virtual Desktop as an add-on to what they have, because most of these customers already have a piece of license which is required for Windows Virtual Desktop. If you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I will review all the questions towards the end of the session and answer them all together. So what are the components that are required for Windows Virtual Desktop? So these are the Azure components that you would require. Of course, you will require an Azure subscription. If your customer is using M365 or Office 365, they typically would have an Azure subscription with an Azure Active Directory already available, right? So the first two components will already be available. If you are planning to move an on-premise customer to Azure or to Windows Virtual Desktop, in that scenario, you will need to make sure that they first have an Azure subscription and create an Azure Active Directory. So both the scenarios are supported and can be very well taken care with Windows Virtual Desktop. So once you have Azure subscription and an Azure Active Directory, the second prerequisite to have Windows Virtual Desktop is an Azure Active Directory, which is either synced with your on-prem Active Directory or you use Azure Active Directory domain services. So one of these two options have to be enabled or have to be implemented because it's a prerequisite for Windows Virtual Desktop. Windows Virtual Desktop only works with an Active Directory infrastructure. So just to repeat, either you need to have your on-premise Active Directory synchronized with Azure Active Directory, or if you have a customer who does not use an on-prem Active Directory at all, then on Azure itself, you can enable a service called as Azure Active Directory Domain Services. This lets you continue to use Windows Virtual Desktop without having to sync from your local Active Directory. But in most of the scenarios that we have worked so far, customers typically have an on-prem Active Directory for managing their on-prem applications, their printers, scanners, users, and all we need to do is just sync this Active Directory to Azure Active Directory. Now, once it is done, of course, we'll need to create a network because Windows Virtual Desktop eventually creates these desktops, and all these desktops have to be part of the domain, and they have to be part of the network in which you have your Active Directory up and running. So either if you sync from your local Active Directory to Azure, then you need to make sure the virtual network is connected to that particular Active Directory so that we can add the Windows Virtual Desktop to that particular network. Apart from this, we will require file server. File server is primarily used to store user profile data. It is used to store the shared data that people would use and access on a Windows Virtual Desktop. We either use a file server, or if you have enterprise customers who have applications that require faster IOPS and high performance storage, then Azure NetApp Files is a very interesting option to look at, right? It's one of the most high performance, cost effective storages which is available natively on Azure, which means you don't need to be a NetApp partner to get Azure NetApp Files. Azure NetApp Files provides you one of the best and fastest disks available in today's market, which you can definitely use it with Windows Virtual Desktop. So you have two options, either a file server or Azure NetApp Files. And at the end, the other component that you would require is the compute and storage for running your desktops. So these are the various components that you would require as part of Azure. And what we have done is to simplify your deployment process. We have introduced an Azure Starter Pack. What the Starter Pack does is this Starter Pack lets your customer integrate his on-premise network and his on-premise Active Directory with Azure. And it's a completely automated solution. This solution is available in Ingram Micro Marketplace. This is our own IP that we have developed, and we have given the rights to use to all the resellers. So it actually covers some of the most important steps which are required for setting up Windows Virtual Desktop. So what does Azure Starter Pack do? It's part of our Instant Cloud solution portfolio. It is a one-click solution which is available from Ingram Micro Marketplace. It automates extending and connecting your on-premise Active Directory with Azure. I've put together a logical diagram at the bottom. So as you can see, most of the customers today have Active Directory, and if they need to start using Azure in one way or the other, then the very first thing that we recommend the customer to do is extend his network and his Active Directory to Azure. Now, if you as a partner have not ventured into Azure and have not started doing a lot of projects, then this automated solution provided by Ingram Micro will help you get started. So this solution extends the network using a VPN connection from Azure, and it gives the customer the ability to connect his on-premise Active Directory to Azure Active Directory. So as you see, Windows Virtual Desktop requires an Active Directory infrastructure on Azure, and this Azure Starter Pack actually helps you get that on-prem system onto Azure. So a very good solution developed, made available on Australian marketplace, Australia and New Zealand marketplace. So this is something that I would strongly recommend the partners to look into when either you have customers who want to move to Azure or as part of Windows Virtual Desktop. This can be Azure Startup Pack can be used independent of Windows Virtual Desktop as well. So, for instance, if you have a customer who wants to migrate an application to Azure and that application uses Active Directory for username and password, right? It uses Active Directory for authentication. Even in that scenario, Azure Starter Pack can be used. So a very effective and useful solution. Instead of taking 3, 4 mandates to implement this particular solution with just a couple of clicks, this can be automated and made ready for your customer. So let's look at the overall deployment steps, right? This is the overall steps that we need to do in order to implement a Windows Virtual Desktop. So the first step is set up Azure Active Directory, which we can use our starter pack. We have to give consent for the RDS deployment. Now, when I say give consent, this consent is with respect to giving access to your subscription to the various platform as a service functionality of Windows Virtual Desktop. In the previous slide, we saw most of the roles of RDS have been made available by Microsoft as platform as a service. So their RD session host, RD gateway, all these are now part of their platform as a service functionality. So all you're doing in giving consent is saying to Microsoft that, hey, this is my subscription and I want to use Windows Virtual Desktop on this, right? Once you have given the consent, then you need to create a user, basically a tenant creator role, create your Windows Virtual Desktop tenant, create your RDS pool, whether it is pooled desktop pool desktop or personal desktop. Then you also create an application pool so that you can go ahead and assign applications which the users can use. And at the end, you just install and configure the client. So there are about 7 to 8 steps that you have to take in order to go ahead and implement Windows Virtual Desktop. Now, for a partner who's now started to do his Windows Virtual Desktop implementations, some of these steps might be tricky, might take some troubleshooting, might take some additional efforts in order to implement. So to make things simple, again, Ingram Micro has brought in a new solution which can help you deploy Windows Virtual Desktop in minutes. So this is just a graphical representation, right? So most of the end users or Microsoft technologies revolve around backup and Office 365 and servers and security. The partners typically provide value-added services in terms of support, in terms of pricing, in terms of migration, in terms of monitoring. But who takes care of managing and maintaining this infrastructure, right? Who takes care of making sure the desktops are not overutilized or underutilized? Who takes care of managing and maintaining the server infrastructure, especially when it comes to scaling up and scaling down? So that is where Ingram Micro is pleased to introduce an orchestration and a management layer. So what does this orchestration and management layer do? This will help you optimize your Windows Virtual Desktop infrastructure, or for that matter, your entire IT infrastructure. It helps you become a managed service provider, which means using this orchestration and management layer, you can actually go ahead and have multiple customers onboarded onto Windows Virtual Desktop, and you can have a different pricing scheme, a different packaging for these customers. The orchestration tool also helps you in provisioning. In the previous slide, we saw the 8 steps. Most of the 8 steps will be now automated by using this particular orchestration tool. It also helps you get a detailed reporting in terms of your customers' utilization, in terms of the cost, in terms of the resource consumption. All these various management capabilities are also available. So this particular optimization and orchestration tool name is Nerdio. So we are now introducing a new product into our Ingram Micro portfolio, which will help you build your own desktop as a service provider model functionality. It'll help you package and price based on your customer requirement. It'll help you set up desktop as a service functionality in a matter of minutes, and it also helps you migrate the on-premise RDS setup to Azure as well. So what does this orchestration management layer do? It simplifies the deployment. It provides you auto scaling functionality. So if your customers initially start off with 15 users, but over a period of time now they have to scale to 25, 30 users, you can enable auto scaling based on the resource utilization, based on user count. So there are various ways to enable auto scaling. You can also do pricing automation. So this tool is not just built for Windows Virtual Desktop. You can combine Office 365 or M365 licensing with Windows Virtual Desktop and pretty much provide IT as a service for your customers. You can automate creation of dedicated host pools. You can automate creation of graphics enabled desktops. You can even create multiple images of applications which are pre-installed and have them available to various customers. Also, this will definitely help you have your own POC setup, do a safe pilot for your customers, and have them up and running in matter of minutes and days. So a very important tool, a very important add-on that Ingram Micro is onboarding. This tool will be available to all the partners in the next coming months. But if you do have a requirement in the next coming months before the deployment of the tool, you can always get in touch with Ingram Micro, and we can look at ways and means of using this particular tool and getting the required deliveries done to your customer. So I'm sure most of you are already aware of the various use cases for desktop as a service or Windows Virtual Desktop. A lot of Windows Virtual Desktop is one of the main reasons for security and regulation. People do not want data leakage to happen. Windows Virtual Desktop is a perfect solution for it. You can store all the data in a central repository. You can manage, monitor the data access. Elastic Workforce is another very important use case, especially when it comes to contract employees, people working from home, mergers and acquisitions, where you have companies merge and they want to quickly have the required number of applications accessed by different employees. They want to monitor and manage the desktops. All those functionalities are now possible with Windows Virtual Desktop. In education sector, where most of the schools and colleges now encourage bring your own device, again, Windows Virtual Desktop becomes a classic solution for such scenarios. And what we are seeing now is more and more specialized workloads, especially design and engineering. I have a lot of partners with whom I have worked on implementing RDS setups in my previous years for having them access design documents, having them run resource intensive graphics on RDS deployment. These were expensive, these were time consuming, but now with Windows Virtual Desktop, in a matter of minutes, you can set up a graphics enabled virtual machine with 6 core and 56 GB RAM and have AutoCAD installed on it, and people can start working on their files in a matter of minutes and hours. So a very, very important use case, especially when it comes to design industry or construction industry. Some of the other use cases, as I spoke about earlier, existing customers with RDS or terminal server deployment, Windows Virtual Desktop becomes a classic use case where you can do a lift and shift or migration of on-prem RDS setup to Azure using Windows Virtual Desktop. If you have customers who use Autodesk uh, for their design-based uh, for their design editing and applications, then you can definitely recommend Windows Virtual Desktop. They don't need to buy high-end laptops that cost $4,000 to $6,000 because these are graphics-enabled laptop. The customer can now look at Windows Virtual Desktop, which gives you options of creating any type of virtual machine, right? It can be a basic virtual machine. It can be a machine with graphics card in it. So definitely a very niche solution that can be proposed to a lot of product design development and civil and construction or even marketing firms as well. So I also wanted to give you a rough idea in terms of how much you can expect the costing to come up to. Again, there are a lot of assumptions that we have put together to give you this idea, but for a typical 10 user company, if you're providing them a pooled desktop, they typically work for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and since it's a small customer, they don't have an Active Directory, so they don't typically require a site-to-site VPN. So the cost would come anywhere between 70 to $75 per user. For a 25 user organization, let's say they are a design firm, a product development or a design firm. So they need a combination of GPU desktops and pool desktops. They need to have a site-to-site VPN. We also need to provide them backup because they work on a lot of files and they work 24 hours a day for, let's say, 5 days a week. So the cost is approximately about $132 per user. For a 50 user organization, we have a combination of graphics enabled desktop, we have dedicated desktops, we have pool desktops. Here we have enabled auto scaling, we have disaster recovery, we have hybrid Active Directory backup. So all the performance related options are enabled here, and here the cost comes up to about $150 per user. So as you see, we can help you build such packages. And the best part is Ingram Micro is very soon coming with Windows Virtual Desktop packages, which will not only include the products, but it will also include implementation, and some of the packages will also include managed support services as well. So you as a partner can just buy these packages from Ingram Micro, and Ingram Micro will do an end-to-end implementation with support services for your customers, and you can go ahead and resell these packages to your customers. So we are coming out with three packages: basic, standard, and premium. Basic is for a smaller company, 1 to 10 users, Active Directory integration, deployment using the Nerdio tool, pool desktops primarily, publish Office apps. So this is typically for a customer who primarily works on Office and browsers, kind of an application. So this is something which we can definitely use. For a slightly bigger organization, we can look at having pooled and personal desktops. We can enable backup for the servers and desktops, provide managed support service for almost a month. For premium, slightly bigger organizations, we can even migrate their on-prem infrastructure to Azure, enable auto scaling functionality, and have support contract for up to 3 months. So we are coming with these three packages. We will be announcing them in the next coming weeks. So keep an eye on for the email communication from Ingram, or you can always get in touch with me, and I will do my best to share you the details as and when it becomes available. So just to summarize, upsell Windows Virtual Desktop and Azure Startup Pack to your Office 365 or M365 customers. So start talking to them, look at options of how you can introduce desktop as a service functionality to your customers. look at customers with already M365 and how they can reuse the Windows 10 license with Windows Virtual Desktop. If you have a customer who is not already on Office 365 or M365 and is now evaluating to move to cloud, then I would definitely recommend them to move to an M365 plan, because then you can take the benefit of Windows Virtual Desktop. I've come across some of the customers in the recent past where they're now moving the customers from an on-prem email hosted solution or a third-party email hosted solution to Microsoft hosted solution. So they always come back saying, hey, should I go with Office 365? Which plan of Office 365? And that is where I educate them about, hey, why don't you look at M365? It gives you additional security. Plus, now you have an added advantage of replacing their on-premise desktops or an on-prem RDS setup with Windows Virtual Desktop, and you don't need to buy the licenses twice. So always look at the option of either upselling Office M365 to Office 365 to use Windows Virtual Desktop, or if you're freshly moving a customer, then I would definitely recommend to move with M365. Migrate on-premise existing RDS to terminal or terminal server to Windows Virtual Desktop. This is another upsell opportunity for partners who want to start building their revenue, their pipeline on Azure. Build your managed service provider business using the tool that we are introducing. This is a fantastic tool, makes partners' life easy. We have seen a lot of success in other regions. We have this tool available with Ingram Micro in US, in Canada, and we have seen a lot of success, partners making a lot of money using this tool. So I would definitely encourage you to reach out to Ingram Micro contact and speak about this particular offering, and replace your existing graphics enabled laptops with Windows Virtual Desktop. So if you have customers, if you're managing customers, if you provide managed services and desktop support to your customers, rather than they purchasing high-end graphics machine enabled laptops, or even purchasing a $3,000, $2,500 laptops, you can always look at replacing these with Windows Virtual Desktop. Before I finish, I quickly wanted to remind all the attendees, if you have not already received the communication about the certification program that we are running, we have AZ 900 and MS 900. So these are fundamental trainings for Azure and modern workspace. We have them running in 4 cities. So if you have not already registered for this training, this is a certification training, which means post the training, you can get yourself certified, and Ingram Micro will reimburse the certification fee for you. So if you have not already registered, I would strongly encourage you to get in touch with your Ingram Micro representative and have yourself registered for this. This is being delivered by Robert Crane. He is the MVP, an MCT, a Microsoft certified trainer. And I would definitely encourage you to make the best use of this certification. So now is the time for questions. If you have any questions on any of the topics that we discussed, feel free to go ahead, post your questions on the question and answers or the chat. Let me go ahead and look at all the questions now. So one of the question is, can any apps be installed on these virtual desktops? The answer is yes. Any apps that you have been running on an on-prem RDS setup, you can run them on these virtual desktops. So if you have, let's say, a Windows 7 application, a printer application, for example, that can be done. So anything that can be enabled in the start menu, you can pretty much publish them as a remote app, or if you have a client server based architecture, you can even have that accessed from the remote desktops as well. So both the options are possible. Another question, what about if client does not want or have equipment to support VPN to Azure? So if the client does not have a VPN, or let's say he doesn't have an on-prem firewall using which he can set up the VPN with Azure, then we can always look at, so VPN is primarily required when it comes to your Active Directory integration, right? So that is where we could potentially use a feature of Azure Active Directory called Azure Active Directory Domain Services, right? So that will help you uh, uh, still get Azure Active Directory with option to join the virtual machines to the network where Azure Active Directory is running. Is there any other question? How are local devices handled? For example, scanners, barcode scanners, etc. Scott, if you could just expand on this question. I'm not able to understand in what context this question is being asked. So if you're talking about how can handheld device work with Windows Virtual Desktop, so if uh, if your handheld device work using REST API or are connecting to the services using a web service, or if your applications can be accessed on a browser. If any of these three are true, then you can use them with Windows Virtual Desktop. But if you could expand on the question, then it'll be helpful. What is the minimum PC configuration requirement? Now, typically to access Windows Virtual Desktop, a thin client would also be sufficient, right? So you don't need to have a high-end machine. I have customers who are accessing Windows Virtual Desktop on an iPad and on an Android tablet and on a Microsoft Surface. So a simple, if you ask me, a simple a 2-core 4 GB RAM machine should also suffice, but even a thin client where you have a dumb machine sitting with just a browser and an internet connection, even that would be enough for you to access Windows Virtual Desktop. So in theory, we could eliminate an RDS server and replace with Windows Virtual Desktop. Absolutely, yes. So the idea of Microsoft introducing Windows Virtual Desktop is because of the limitations that RDS has on-prem. And if you even set up RDS as RDS on Azure, it is expensive because you will need to enable several roles. You'll need to create several virtual machines for it. So taking all this feedback, Microsoft has now introduced Windows Virtual Desktop. And if you have also looked at Microsoft acquisition, they acquired a company called FSLogix, which actually helps you with user profile containerization and app containerization. So all those are working in the background of Windows Virtual Desktop and giving you the best-in-class functionality that a typical RDS setup should provide. So yeah, you can eliminate your on-prem RDS server with Windows Virtual Desktop. Was the pricing per month? Are you providing the slide deck after the session? The pricing were per month per user. And yes, you will be receiving an email from Ingram Micro with the slide deck attached to it. I'm just checking if all the questions have been answered. Local printers are redirected to Windows to virtual desktop just like RDP session does. The answer is yes. So this is where I'm sorry, your site-to-site VPN or your connectivity with on-premise would come into place, right? So if you have printers and scanners running in your on-prem and you want these printers and scanners to communicate with the Windows Virtual Desktop, which is running in Azure, you need to have some kind of connectivity, some kind of communication channel open between Azure and on-prem local printers. So this is where a site-to-site VPN will play its role. And since we are syncing your Active Directory to Azure, it has all the required information to connect to local printers and scanners and get the job done. Can the starter pack be used to move a physical server to Azure Active Directory Cloud Server? Answer is yes. So if you want to move an on-premise physical server which has Active Directory on it, and you want to move this to a virtual machine in Azure with Active Directory role, you can still use the starter pack for it. So there are two ways of how you can use it. Either you can use your on-premise Active Directory migration to Azure Active Directory, or you can use on-premise Active Directory migration to a virtual machine in Azure which has the Active Directory role in it. So both these options are possible with Azure Starter Pack. What is Azure NetApp Files? So Azure NetApp Files is a native NetApp offering available in Azure. Um, if you are aware of NetApp, NetApp is a storage and a data management solution company. They provide one of the best storage solutions in the market. Most of the resource intensive applications such as Oracle, SAP, Epicor, and other ERP solutions actually use NetApp storage because they provide faster IOPS, deduplication, compression, and now the same technology can be used with Windows Virtual Desktop. Because in Windows Virtual Desktop, you still need a storage shared across your virtual desktops to for your user profile, for shared access of files. So that is where Azure NetApp File becomes a very good add-on for enterprise customers who require fast and quick uh, storage solution for their applications. Please describe in more detail when RDS licenses are required. RDS licenses are required in all the scenarios when it comes to Windows Virtual Desktop, right? Whether you are accessing, uh, uh, I'm sorry, RDS licenses typically come into play when you want to have a server as your Windows Virtual Desktop. So instead of having a Windows 10 as your desktop, if you want to access, let's say, a Windows Server 2016 or 2019 on Azure as part of your desktop or as part of your virtualization, then you require an RDS uh, server CAL. If you are accessing a Windows 10, then you either require a Windows 10 subscription license, or if you're already part of M365, then Windows 10 subscription license is already available with you. So RDS CAL is primarily required if you want to access a server instead of a desktop or in Windows Virtual Desktop. Is there a limit on total number of users for this product? The answer is no. You can have any number of users. I'm just checking if I have answered all the questions. Okay, so I think I've answered most of the questions which were put up in the question and answers. So if there are any questions which were not answered up as per your expectation, feel free to drop me an email. My email address is displayed on the slide. It is firstname.lastname@ingramicro.com. Thank you very much for taking out time and joining today's session. It was a pleasure delivering the session to you. Windows Virtual Desktop is the next big thing in the market, and I would strongly encourage partners to capitalize on it. So if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to get in touch with me and we'll do our best to help you. Thank you very much and have a great day ahead.